Hi, it's another Friday, and that means another episode of the Zogby Report, Real and Unscripted, the United State of Democracy, with a question mark. I'm here again. I'm John. I'm here again with my son and partner, boss, Jeremy.
Boss?
I don't know about that. Been upgraded. How are you doing?
Fine.
Good.
Better after I heard that.
Yeah, you should. And our hearts do go out to the many people in Florida. This is just devastating. And, hopefully, some sort of speedy normalcy. But honestly, it doesn't look like that's going to happen.
Hopefully people have learned their lesson from Katrina.
Yeah, hopefully. Anyway, I wanted to talk about our profession today. I'm springing this on you as I always do, but been a couple of articles that have come out recently, one in the Washington Post, one in the Washington Examiner, but a few here and there, all pretty much saying, the same sort of thing. Are the polls going to get it wrong again this year? Or more exclamatory, the polls are sure to get it wrong again this year. And that prompted at least one writer, columnist for the Washington Post, to say, are we asking the right questions about polls? Do we have the right expectations for what polls can tell us and what really they can't tell us? And as you recall, and some of you out there who are fans can recall, I did a piece for the Miami Herald after the last election about let's start asking smart questions about polls and realizing what they tell us, as opposed to, playing that kind of Las Vegas game, of which horse comes in first, which comes in second, and the one that wins by a nostril must be much better than the one who loses by a nostril and therefore is finished. So I've been on both sides. I've won by full lengths. I've won by nostrils. I've lost by nostrils in the final horse race. But it really doesn't matter. And so I'm just going to wax eloquent, I hope, just for a couple of minutes and say the real fault is with people who are paid to read the polls and are reading them all wrong. Mm-hmm. I mean, if it's television or newspaper, social media, everybody hangs on that horse race number. And they do it even that wrong. So-and-so is ahead by 2 points. That means the pollster says so-and-so is going to win. Whether it's March or April or July, frankly, 2 weeks before. Many of those who do the aggregation, the Real Clear Politics, the 538, and so on, build odds and make forecasts on a daily basis. And the forecasts go up and the forecasts go down. And they're really misleading, I have used this metaphor so many times. If I know that I need to lose 20 pounds by November 8th, and by the way, I do need to lose 20 pounds by November 8th, I can't predict today whether I'm going to or not. But does that mean that I don't get on the scale? And so I get on the scale, and one day I need to lose actually 23 pounds, and another day 19 pounds. That answers me the question, how am I doing now, and what do I need to do between now and then? It doesn't in any way say, John, give it up, forget it, or just sail through. You're going to win. That's why we do polls. One of the reasons why we do polls. But the more important thing we do is we probe and describe the American mind, the American mood. How many times have I said, it's not just attitudes, fleeting opinions, it's core values that drive people And what are those values at this moment in time? And what do they portend? Which of those values is dominant in them? And may be the one trigger that makes them pull the lever one way or another. Do you see it that way?
Absolutely. I'm listening to you, and you'll see a poll, say the congressional generic ballot. That's the hot one right now, right? It's been the hot one the whole summer. Everybody wants to know who's going to have control of Congress. And so I mentioned the poll last week. I said I saw one. I couldn't remember who it was. It wasn't Trafalgar. But they said that it was something like 45 to 44. I'm sorry, maybe it was the Biden Trump 2024 reelect or election. Regardless, the point is that the way the media on both sides will spin that, conservatives will say there isn't Trump fatigue. No, that's right. If Trump is down by 1 point, there probably isn't Trump fatigue. The Democrats, in many cases, will say, look, we're ahead. But there's a margin of error. It's a virtual tie. And 44 plus 45 is 89, which means 11% are undecided. So to me, the 1 point lead is not the headline, because the 1 point lead is meaningless. There's a margin of error. The 11% undecided is the headline, which means it's a toss-up. Who are those 11%? What do they feel? Let's track them. Let's see how a week from now, if that diminishes. Let's go into the field after a major event and see if it moves the needle. I think I'm saying almost the same thing that you're saying.
Yeah.
That I'll just put it a little differently. There's an agenda. And this is no surprise that, to me, I'm sorry, it's kind of laughable that a network does a poll. Unless they team up with an independent group like us, and yes, that is an advertisement out there.
We're available.
We're available. I mean, because if you're independent and you've done business for socialists, communists, Democrats, Republicans, libertarians, people who smoke pot, people who are Catholic, whatever, I think that institution is more likely to report the numbers, but too much of it is agenda driven, and that's no surprise in the environment that we're in.
So I'm a news director, and a poll comes in, and it shows Biden 45, Trump 44. And I say, on one hand, it's a competitive race. But I'm a news director, and a news director is driven by ratings. News director is driven by whatever kind of shitstorm can be created from a story. That's boring. So there's almost a mandate for me as a news director to turn that into something that's going to generate controversy, something that's going to be counterpoint. And so the incentives are all wrong, all in the interests of these days what's going to generate buzz on social media, what's going to make it on Twitter, and so on. The interpretation you gave reminds me of a famous number, and I've used this one many times. In 2016, of course, Hillary versus Trump. And the sense was Hillary is marching on to victory. So her people knew that. Everybody seemed to know that. I did not know that. And I kept warning. And in fact, there's a paper trail in my Forbes columns that were coming out pretty much daily. But one trigger was a Sunday morning before the election. And it was CBS Face the Nation. And they led with their latest poll headline that among blacks, Hillary had a commanding lead of 81-8. And they said this is a clear indication of how strong she is among blacks.
Yeah.
And I remember saying a bunch of things. Number one, Barack Obama got 95% of the vote in 2008, 93% of the black vote in 2012. Why is she at only 81% the Sunday before the election?
Yeah.
But the second piece of it, and I'm sorry because you've heard this almost every day, is that 11% of blacks are undecided.
Yeah.
If they're undecided, blacks don't vote Republican. Maybe, now in the last couple of years, you're starting to see a little bit of growth, and Democrats need to be concerned about that. But in 2016, that 11% undecided, that told me
They weren't going to turn out.
they weren't going to turn out. And if they don't turn out, that's devastating.
Yeah.
They didn't turn out.
Yeah.
And we all know what happened. She lost.
Yeah. I mean, it's in this hyper-partisan environment, it's like the 90-10 rule. The Republicans should expect 90% of their base to turn out for them. And if they get 88, 89, same thing with Democrats.
Trouble.
I just said, and I'm going to tie this all together, but I was reminded, this environment we're in is really extraordinary. But I was listening to a podcast, and I was reminded this goes back to 2004. 2016 was a watershed. 2020 was a watershed. It was like part one and part two of the same movie. But 2004, and again, I mean, full disclosure, I only started following politics during the 2000 election when I was a senior in high school. But so I can't go back 40, 50 years. I could go back 22 years, but 2004 was watershed because that was the first time I started hearing, and people older than me started hearing, I'm not inviting him over. I'm not inviting her over for dinner. You know what? I don't want to live in that neighborhood because that's a Democrat neighborhood. That's a Republican. This goes back to 2004, and it's been intensifying. And a lot of it is, like you said, it's that network effect in a different context, right? That it's driven by ratings. And of course, I'm reminded of the prophetic movie Network in the 70s. We're mad as hell and we're not going to take it. And they, in the movie, the Howard Beale, right? Well, that's a brilliant thing to do. Let's keep a crazy man who should be, institutionalized. Let's keep him on air because that's lovely. That's going to drive ratings, and that's playing out before our eyes. So you said about point counterpoint. I actually think that would be, I don't know anything about what brings ratings, but to me, I would like to see from the networks to bring a left-leaning pollster on and a right-leaning pollster and debate it out. And I don't know, maybe that wouldn't really drive ratings, but it would certainly be more enriching about data and where we are really going, but that's just not what, I guess, the executives want to do.
I'm going to be bold. This is shifting the conversation completely. And I'm also not being tongue-in-cheek. I don't know that there's sufficient demand or need for 24-hour news. Because you got to fill in what are known as news holes, and you can't, I suppose, be repeating the same story, and CNN discovered that the initial framework of headlines, every 15 minutes, headlines, and then a couple of stories and headlines, A, was not interesting, and B, was not sustainable financially. And so they moved then to the talk. Here is the latest news, but we've gathered a panel. Then you have the panel yelling at each other for 10 or 15 minutes. I have to say, and I've been in years past on those panels, nobody really knows what they're talking about except the buzz that they're hearing from each other that they then bring on the air. And I am tying this all together. I am old enough to remember television in 1952.
Howdy doody.
Howdy doody. And what you have, we got one station and then another one in Syracuse that was pretty fuzzy. But what you had was the Today Show in the morning. And after the Today Show, there was a show for kids called Ding Dong School. And then the TV went blank until noon, and there were a couple of soap operas, and then it was blank all afternoon. You turn the TV on, 4:45, 5 minutes to 5, there was a signal, a civil defense signal. Actually, it was on a board. In case of an emergency, call this number, And then at 5 o'clock sharp, that board would go down and you'd hear, "Hey kids, what time is it?" Well, it's howdy doody time. But the point was, go off the air until you got something that's real. And if you don't have anything that's real, don't turn it into breaking news. In fact, you see that CNN has abandoned that model because everything was breaking news. If they had a new guest coming on, breaking news. If somebody had a report from the White House, a routine report, it was breaking news. It's all become so skewed and dramatic, and yet their audiences are still going down.
Yeah.
Now, I got off onto that. That's the news media. Let's get back to what we were talking about. I think the dangerous misreading of polls that leads people to make projections, that leads people to create betting odds, that leads people to draw conclusions before an election that I think are really unwarranted. All we should be saying is, it's close, it's not so close. Here's what the Democrats need to do. Polls tell us this is what they have to do, and are we seeing any evidence that they're appealing to this group or that group? Analyze them that way, but on election night, wait for the real returns to come in.
So let's say you're a board member, I don't know, for whatever network, okay? Well, let me put that aside. I remember listening to your talks. You came to my college for the 04 election, and the first time I ever heard the term the Armageddon election. I don't know if you used that for 2000, that term, did you?
I used it in 04 for the first time.
Okay, 04. And then I couldn't help but notice after every election that it was still an Armageddon
There were
election.
still Armageddon elections.
That doesn't mean to say that anybody who, was sharing that sentiment was wrong. It was building. And now it's to the point where even a midterm election is now, the stakes are higher this time around than in 2020 and 2016. We're in a boiling pot. So with that context set, that's what's brewing in our landscape, the exponentially growing notion of ever more Armageddon elections. You're on the board, you've got the other board members' ears at some network. What do they do? What should they do? What do they need? I know you've kind of alluded to it, but what's an actual first step that they need to do to stop this?
All right, so you have to decide what's good copy, what's the sexy headline, what's the thing that's going to generate controversy. On the other hand, do we have a responsibility to present news and calm things down? I think it's time that we opt for the latter, because what we're living right now is network and the movie, as you noted earlier. And what you have right now is kind of like an endless cycle that feeds into itself, feeds frenzied mentalities to the point where left and right don't even watch the same news. If I'm on the left, I'm going to watch MSNBC or CNN. If I'm on the right, it's going to be Fox or Newsmax or One America or whatever it is they call it. And that's just going to feed my anger and give me, for the first time ever, it's going to give me my own facts, my own reality. A sense that not only do I not want to live in the same neighborhood as somebody over here, but I don't have to, because I have my own facts. I have my own reality. I don't want to persuade you. I just want to win. I want to be with like-minded people. I think the media has a responsibility first and foremost to tell the news. Tell the news in a narrative, and then the power of television has always been video. Where there's video, use the video. Television should not persuade. Television should just simply present. Same thing with radio. I mean, AM radio has gone way off the wall.
Yeah. And I mean, here's the thing, and hear me out, because I will introduce both sides here. I saw a clip the other day of talking heads in the left media repeating in the same message but in varied ways that this is war. They are the enemy. A senator, we need to kill this movement. Other talking heads, they will destroy I mean, this is unbelievable. That was the Democrats talking about the Republicans following Joe Biden's speech, but make no mistake about it. From the Democratic point of view, the Republicans are the enemy. From the Republicans' point of view, the Democrats are the enemy. If Democrats gain power, whether it's in the presidency or in Congress or in the Senate, to the Republicans, they will destroy the country. Vice versa, looking right back at you. How do we deal with that?
There is tradition. And somebody has to take the first step. Now, I mean, these are worn out cliche stories about George McGovern, Barry Goldwater played handball with each other 3 times a week. There was a mutual respect, and these were the far extremes of both parties. Ronald Reagan, Tip O'Neill would battle during the day and laugh over a late night glass of scotch, and they played cards with each other. And it seems like a simpler era. Maybe it was. These guys were at odds. I mean, it's not a bad thing to have 2 political parties with 2 different points of view, but there also has to be a notion of a common accepted rules of engagement and common values. And that's what's missing today. I don't see either side talking about the Constitution or the rule of law unless it's the Constitution and the rule of law that supports their side. Now, I'm going to be bipartisan, like you. One of the things that makes 2022 another Armageddon election is that you almost have to say, does it matter if somebody wins? Is the other side going to accept? But to be fair, there is a United States Supreme Court. I don't personally like the makeup of the court. I think that the Dodd decision was very dangerous. But the Supreme Court of the United States has ruled. Now, you don't go attacking the Supreme Court or denying the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. What you do is get yourself prepared for the next elections and prepare then to utilize the system to get different people on the court.
That's the short-term game, and then the long-term game is how do we figure out to get our 20, 30, 40 years? Because regarding Roe v. Wade, your opposition had to live under that and didn't want to live under that, and they lived under that for decades. And so now you need to prepare just as your enemy, I don't even want to use that term, your opponent, you're going to go maybe 10, 15, 20 years, but how do you figure out how to get your next 20, 30 years? Or how do you figure out to reduce that to 5 years? But that's not what they're doing. You know, the Founding Fathers were divided. The Founding Fathers were very flawed people. You know, I'm appreciating more and more Gore Vidal and his novel Burr, which Washington, Jefferson, and Hamilton, and probably a host of other Founding Father characters were just flipped upside down. Washington was a buffoon. Jefferson believed in personal liberty, but once you gave him power, boy, you know, he was a hypocrite. And Hamilton was, you know, the quintessential fox, sly, conniving politician.
The only good guy was Burr.
Yeah, and Burr's been written out of history, so I'd like to really know more about, you know, him. But the point is that at least the Founding Fathers knew that they themselves, once they got power, were going to abuse it. They were aware of this. They knew the whole reason they set up the system to be a limited government, to be checks and balances, because they didn't trust their own selves. But that's 180 degrees from today. Both sides completely trust themselves that their agenda is going to move forward, but what they don't realize is that the other half of the country doesn't want that agenda. And so they're going to ram it down each other's throats. They trust their side with power, but they absolutely must not. And that is a radical difference between now and the founding of this country. And we have swayed so far from that I'm sorry to say, Democrats and Republicans are a threat to this democracy.
I don't disagree, and I think the most troubling thing to me is the way that both parties operate elections. The DCCC, the NRCC, they train these kids fresh out of college to go to war. And you know what has always bothered me, not living inside the Beltway, living in a real congressional district, which at times has been very competitive, how you can actually have the Democratic nominee for Congress and the Republican nominee for Congress as folks who've always gotten along with each other, had drinks with each other, maybe even in some way even related to each other. But when the kids come in from Washington, they come in with their military battle mandate and their handbooks and essentially start the dirty, nasty campaigning. You know, I recall, and I will mention names. Mike Arcuri was our congressman for a few terms and a good friend of mine. Ray Meyer, Republican, very conservative, I think is a very good friend of mine. We would not lose if either one were elected. But by the end of that campaign, these two guys were hating each other. And both were dissociating themselves from the ads that the PACs that supported them were running on their behalf. So much has to be done to tone down the rhetoric. I think it's not only the media. I think this is a room for schools. I think there's room for places of worship. I think there's room for local media to do whatever it is they can to A, inform, and B, calm things down.
Yeah. I'll just say that, you know, the only thing that's going to stop this is you're going to have to go back to the playbook of Gandhi and Martin Luther King. You know, Gandhi said that the British are crippling us, so we'll go to the sea and we'll get our own salt, and we'll do it peacefully. And Martin Luther King said they're not letting us ride the bus with dignity, so we're going to walk. People are going to have to unplug. They're just simply going to have to unplug. And when they unplug, the new institutions, the local institutions could easily come up. We are starving for real investigative journalists, for real journalists, not active. We don't need activists anymore, but way too many activists. That's my final thought.
And my final thought is, in the meantime, start reading the polls right. And that goes for readers, voters, consumers in general. Read between the lines and understand what the poll is telling you. Not who's ahead by a point or ahead by 10 points, but simply what are the drivers? Who are the key groups? What can be done or should be done by one side or the other to make an appeal? Don't turn it into a horse race.
Just a few more things. We've got it's been released, the poll on the manufacturing executives. That's on Forbes. We'll be sending it out with this podcast. I will include a link to the Forbes article. You should follow this poll. This is the sentiment on the supply chains from the perspective of those who were on the front line, the manufacturing executives. I apologize that over the month, maybe even month and a half, we have been frequently referencing our poll of independents and moderates. Unfortunately, it hasn't come out yet. It hasn't been released yet. We have the data, but we're working with a partner, so it's another party, and we're trying to figure things out. Apologize for the complication. As soon as we have our green light, you will see a series on our website of analysis of who independents and moderates are. I just have to make that clear that we'd really like to get this out. I came into this conversation, I really wanted to talk about the Nord Stream, but maybe we can save that for next week. If you want to get my take on it, you should email me or get in touch with me, or you can wait till next week. Maybe I'm sure there'll be more to come.
Okay, good discussion.
Yeah, very much.
Have a good week.